evaluating 7 publicly available hops cultivars in our trial. Some popular hops cultivars like Mosaic, Citra, and Simcoe are not publicly available and come out of private breeding programs that require a contract with a company in order to acquire plants and be grown. This limits what growers are able to produce these cultivars. These contracts would likely be difficult for an Arkansas grower to secure, and so we are only looking at cultivars that are publicly available and can be purchased by anyone. Here are the 7 cultivars we're looking at. We have Cascade, Nugget, Zeus, Cashmere, Crystal, Centennial, and Canadian Red Vine. Let's walk through the field a little bit and talk about the characteristics of each of these. Again, these plants were mostly all planted in the mid-fall of 2018 using plug plants. This is our second harvest season. We actually got a small harvest last year in 2019 on the first summer after planting some of these plants. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is Cascade, and this is probably one of the most widely grown cultivars of hops that's produced here in the U.S. This cultivar was developed even here in the United States by the USDA hop breeding program and was released as an aroma variety, but has been used as a dual-purpose hop. As you can see here, it's very productive and early for us. The plants have been healthy, and we saw flowering in late June after the plants were cut back in early May. It is showing some nice large hop cones. Lateral branches are more compact than some of the other cultivars, which you'll kind of see here. So this is one of the lateral branches, and you can kind of see that it's staying closer to that main vine. Some of the other cultivars have a lot longer and more significant number of them. One thing we are noticing is that this cultivar has cones that are ready for harvest and still has some flowers on it. And this could make mechanized or single pass harvest a little bit more difficult because of the differences in hop cone maturity. We did get a small harvest off of this cultivar in the first year of planting, and we're excited to see how this is going to perform in terms of quality and yield here in Arkansas. What we're going to talk about is Nugget, and this has shown pretty poor vigor and plant health and really poor cone set overall. In 2018, when we first planted these plants, we saw really poor survival on the plants going into the first season of 2019, and we replanted a lot of those during 2019, and so a lot of these plants are really only a year old. But this year, the performance has really not improved. Nugget was originally intended for use as a bittering hop and was also released by the USDA. We're seeing really poor lateral branches, and this is not one we would currently recommend for planting in Arkansas on a commercial scale. You can see that typically we are training 3 bines per plant, but on this plant we were only able to get 2 successfully, and we're not really seeing very much cone set yet, if any cone set will happen at all on this cultivar. All right, next up is Zeus, and Zeus is sometimes also called CTZ or Columbus Tomahawk or Zeus. And it goes by several of these names, but basically it refers to all of the same variety. This is another one that is also very widely planted in the United States, again making up anywhere from 10 to 11% of hop acreage across the United States. If you look at Zeus now, it's growing very vigorously, but we saw from the early season that it was kind of slow to get started. Last year, this cultivar was our biggest producer, and that was on plants that were only 9 months old. And this year is still putting on quite a show. We're seeing very vigorous lateral arm branches, and in fact, we may need to actually have this planted on a slightly wider plant spacing than what we've given it here. All of our cultivars are planted on 2.5 feet due to the space we have available, but this one might do better at about 3.5 feet. Again, it was slow to get started after we pruned it back in the spring, but now appears to be the cultivar that will be ready for harvest first. And we are seeing better uniformity of hop cone maturity on this cultivar over Cascade right now, and a really nice setting of hops cones on Zeus. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is Cashmere, and this is a dual-purpose hop resulting from a cross between Cascade and Northern Brewer. It's supposed to have higher alpha acids than Cascade and kind of a tropical citrus aroma. This one looked a little poor early on in the season, but it has recovered and now has some nice cone set. It does kind of appear that the cones are a little bit smaller than some of the other cultivars that we've looked at. And this one did have poor survival on the first year, and we replanted. So some of these plants are only 1 year old, which may be impacting some of the results that we were seeing and explain why these plants are a little bit smaller overall. We are still continuing to evaluate this one. We are excited about the potential of this one just because of the hop cone quality and its potential use in brewing. All right, next up is Crystal, and Crystal is described as being a hop that is mild and with a spicy aroma. Early on in the season, this was a very vigorous grower. But as of now, it's not quite as vigorous as some of the other ones that we see out here, like Zeus. But it has some cone set, but maybe some weaker bind vigor overall. And if you zoom in here, I do want to point out something. This is again another one where we're seeing, some flowers still being set, and then higher up we're seeing cones being set. So we're still evaluating this one. We did get a small harvest off of this cultivar in the first year after planting. All right, now we're going to look at Centennial. Centennial is a dual-purpose hop, sometimes called Super Cascade for its similar characteristics to Cascade. It was named for the centennial anniversary of Washington State, and again was developed by the USDA program. Early on in the season, this was a very vigorous grower. We've seen some inconsistencies across our different plots in how this one is performing, and so we're going to kind of keep an eye on it. In some places, it does look pretty good. In the first year, it did struggle to grow well in the early spring, much like Nugget, but it's doing a lot better this year. As we move up and look at the plant, you will see that there is some nice cone size, but the number of cones that are being set is not as impressive as some of the other cultivars we've already looked at. And then finally, we're going to look at Canadian red vine. And this is a new cultivar for us this year, and is maybe one that you've never heard of, but it has shown promise in some other parts of the southeast, and so we wanted to try it here in Arkansas. Just to give you a heads up, because this is new, these plants were only planted in May of this year, and so they're relatively young, but we are getting some good growth off of them in this first year. Canadian red vine did start setting laterals and blooms in early July, and if you look closely, you can still see that there are still blooms here on the plants, and that we haven't gotten to cone set yet on this variety, and that's probably partially because of the late planting date. This one is interesting also because of the hop cone quality. So it's known to have low alpha acids of about 5% or less, but to have very high cohumulone of about 47%, which is sometimes thought to impart kind of a harsh or bitter flavor. However, it can be used with other hops when brewing to kind of balance out some of that. It's described as having an aroma that's a mild berry or cherry flavor or some grapefruit peel aroma. So we're interested in this cultivar because it is said to be very vigorous and disease resistant, which are qualities that are going to be important for us in our hot and humid environment. Some concern is that the plant can be a little too bush-like and doesn't grow as upright as some of the other hops cultivars. We're not really seeing that here, but we'll see if that plays out later on in future seasons. For all of these cultivars, we're going to be collecting data on wet and dry hop cone yields per plant and running analysis on the alpha and beta acids and quality of the dried cones for brewing. These results are going to be reported on later this year, so keep an eye out for that information on our blog.